Welcome to the Vanguard podcast, guys. Today we're joined by Brian Matlock, who's running for Senate in Kansas, and you're running as a Republican Socialist. Very interesting label right there. If you wouldn't mind introducing yourself to our listeners and explaining that a little bit, maybe?
Sure. Yeah, my name's Brian Matlock. I live here in Kansas City, Kansas, with my wife, and around the corner from my daughter. She's about y'all's age. We adopted her when she's 16, so she's like pretty close in age to us.
Yeah.
Anyways, let's see. I'm from Nampa, Idaho originally. I've lived in Kansas City, Kansas for the last 11 years. Grew up very religious and was planning on being a minister for most of my life up until I finished an undergraduate and degree in cross-cultural ministry, and then went abroad working with AIDS ministries stuff in South Africa. But kind of through that whole time, got more and more exposed to kind of left political ideology, and then just like in the midst of being in very distressed communities, it's sort of like, what's up with poverty? And trying to understand it, and then also getting a lot more critical view, like hanging out with people in those communities and seeing how churches come in and have these like ideas that you're all in poverty in this whole section of the city because you don't believe in Jesus or something. And so just kind of got frustrated by some of these tensions, and then my wife's a sociology major, and so lots of interesting political reading, and so we were kind of just in this feedback loop of like, so you asked about Republican Socialism.
Oh, yeah.
Long story short, just kind of like got more and more involved in kind of like doing less of the church-related stuff and more like activism-y stuff, and ended up learning about this socialist economics program here at UMKC, one of very few graduate economics programs that are lefty. And so I went back to school because I was interested in understanding these big social issues and all of that. One of my advisors is now Bernie Sanders' chief economist and New York Times bestselling author. So there was all of this policy stuff around and whatever. I guess partly I realized in the midst of the 2016 election, and then seeing all around the world, like Modi in India, Duterte in
the Philippines,
and Turkey. It's like we're seeing these far-right nationalists pop up all over the world. And so the liberal ideology that's like the problem is really super frustrating because they have no material analysis of what is going on globally that's giving rise to this type of nationalist, like ethno-nationalist politics. And but what was frustrating is we keep seeing the same matchup. It's like technocratic neoliberals like Clinton, like
Obama.
Obama, Macron in France, all these things going up against far-right ethno-nationalists. And it was just so frustrating to see like someone who's saying status quo of this, which is causing like this sort of backlash internationally. We're going to just keep doing that. And those are our options. Either keep the thing that's breeding this far-right ethno-nationalism or ethno-nationalism itself. And so I think what I was like trying to think about, how do we move forward? And in my estimation, Democrats are happy to just keep stringing along progressives and socialists and don't feel like they have to deliver anything because they don't actually want the same things. And they feel like, well, we're the only game in town. Who are you going to vote for? And so, like, what I kind of realized was a lot of the values that led me towards left politics came from my Republican parents. Like I feel like this continuous life trajectory I've had has been about like, because they were like a lot of working class Republicans and small town and rural like communitarian values have a lot more in common with socialism than big business Republicans. Like they're constantly opening their homes to others, donating, volunteering, helping out their neighbors. And they're like against being acquisitive and money hungry and more want you to focus on relationships, which ironically makes them easy to be organized by the greediest people in society, because they're like, oh, look at these union people and socialists. They're never content, always greedy, always demanding more, never just like happy in life. And so it's like they end up anyway. So I was started to think about like, how do we kind of build a narrative and a movement that will kind of address some of the very difficult things that working class people in agricultural states, which are overwhelmingly red, that will have a better narrative of what they've been experiencing in the midst of globalization, but then organizes them in solidarity with immigrants and people of color who are also experiencing quite similar things during this time period, rather than scapegoating them and avoiding the underlying issues. And so that's kind of been the thing. It's an open seat. I'm running against 10 people who are all running on a platform of, I'm the most Trumpian Republican. And so my gambit was like, well, hopefully they split the vote enough and there's enough good neighbor Republicans, as I call them, who would get on board with that. And then I think in a general, it would steamroll, because it would like kind of expose the Democrats' ideology, which is very conservative in general. It's like the Democrats, not only are they running the most like milquetoast centrist candidate for this position, and really suppressed everyone else running in the Democratic
Yeah, I was going to
race.
ask about that. Barbara Bollier, is that her name? She's the
Bollier,
Democrat Bollier that's looks like is probably going to take away the Democratic nomination. You said it looks like they kind of suppressed more progressives in the
Big
running.
time.
Yeah,
they're worse than the Republicans with that. Like Schumer, he like handpicks who he wants, and he tries to get everyone like before Bollier announced, they got like 3 other Dems to drop out, and then Usha Reddy stayed in, and she was more progressive by far than Bollier. But they just like no institutional support, no like.
Wasn't Bollier like a Republican herself up until 2018?
Yes, that is correct.
Yeah, and it kind of echoes exactly what we saw, in 2018, a race that Gavin and I both followed very closely between Brent Welder and Sharice Davis, and we saw the money that came at the last minute to make sure that Sharice Davis, the less progressive of the two, was the one that would be in the final showdown.
Yeah,
and they just really believe like what Republicans really want is like big corporations and all of it, like all this centrist nonsense, and then like it's not enough just that they think the only thing that can get by in a red state is a centrist corporate Dem, but then they're pouring money into supporting Kobach in the primary. Like there's a PAC that they found the money was coming from Democrats.
The Pied Piper strategy, yeah.
Yeah, because they think he'll be easier to beat, which is what we saw with Trump in the Clinton campaign. And it is so dangerous. So they're actively supporting a white nationalist, like extremist candidate. So it's like, which is so bad. Like everything they do is like this short term, our highest chance of winning at the lowest risk, in the face of long term failure. Like I've been to a number of events in rural Kansas that Bollier's been invited to. She hasn't been showing up to any of them because, like, I spoke to one of the Dems from the House, and he's like, well, all we need is 10 counties to win this election out of 105. So they're like, we'll just abandon most of the state, just stick to only like spending time with, organizing in, talking to people in the populated areas, which of course no one's going to vote for someone who doesn't like them, doesn't spend time there. And it is just a terrible long-term strategy to leave all of rural America to never have anyone organizing there except for white nationalists. And so I think long term, like with the Green New Deal, it like currently red states feel like it's something that's being shoved down their throats by coastal idiots or something. But honestly, this should feel like a huge win for them, and like farmers and people in agricultural states should be part of designing this, because every farmer I've talked to so far is like, oh yeah, I wish I could roll back time 40 years till we had like smaller farms, more tight-knit community, instead of like this massive debt explosion that's happened on farmers. They keep going under and gobbling bigger and bigger, and the industrial feedlots and all of the things. It's like they produce way more food per farmer, but they're like poorer than they were in many cases because it's so expensive. Like all of the, copyrights on seeds, the tractors that you have, they have like proprietary, so you can't even work on your own tractor. You have to have John Deere work on the tractor. And so you have like a real loss of control. They're depopulating things. But have we seen cheaper consumer prices? Not really. Like it's like after decades of moving heaven and earth to reform agriculture in this cult of efficiency, and we have about 10 cents a pound cheaper on beef. Like, was it really worth it to like destroy rural America?
Well, it kind of goes back to the point that Thomas Frank famously made in his book, "What's the Matter with Kansas?" Right? Like we've seen people move, especially the Democratic Party, move away from the issues that would have, I guess, excited a base of farmers. And it's not that farmers can't be excited by, more progressive kind of, especially economics. I mean, Kansas as a state has a long tradition, if you go back far enough, of populist farming, progressive economic policy of people in Western Kansas. I'm just curious, when you go out and talk to these people who, had previously given their vote to somebody like Pat Roberts, who held the seat for that's now vacate. What's the reaction that you get when you introduce a policy like the Green New Deal after the Republicans have spent so many decades, investing in climate denialism?
Like the way I try to talk about climate and environment is in more concrete terms to avoid some of the loaded, like, oh, it's all fake or something. It's like, look, here's some things we all know. Fossil fuels are finite. We're going to run out. We have to switch eventually. They make air quality and water quality worse. Plastics have been around for a single generation. They are piling up around the world and not going anywhere except for filling our oceans and all of these things. We can't keep kicking these problems down the road. But then I try to talk about how the things that they want are in common with, like, okay, these industrial feedlots. It used to be like manure would enrich the soil. Now it's like so concentrated that it is toxic and like destroys the environment. And so I'm like moving more towards this like regenerative farming, direct sales, like, and like the smaller farms is better for the environment too, and it meets their goals of like more functional, prosperous rural communities. So I mean, overall, I would say there's like fear because there's been so much like, they feel like, and they've been fed this line that this is the only option. Like, this is the only game in town. This is the only way to do it. And so there's just kind of like, and they're so in debt. Like, they're so in debt on average. And so it feels fragile. Like,
could you talk about that a little more? I feel like a lot of people might not be aware of the financial strains that a lot of our rural population are under. Most people don't have any idea what it's like to be a farmer. I mean, we're all Kansas, guys, and to be honest, I don't really know a whole lot about farming. So, what kind of debt are these farmers under? What kind of measures do we need to take to make sure that we, are taking better care of our farmers as a country?
Yeah, for one, there's been a move. So one of the problems that was true of the last time we did this like globalization bid 100 years ago, and it was so catastrophic, ending in 2 world wars and a Great Depression, that literally everyone abandoned the free market model in favor of like social democracy, welfare state, fascism, or full commie Soviet style or something like.
Totalitarianism, yeah.
But then, like we decided, what if we tried it again? Anyway, so some of the issue is when you're a farmer, you're competing with everyone else in the world, like who's growing these like raw materials, wheat, beef, whatever. But if you control the supply lines, it's like to coordinate these massive things, you have growth of extreme inequality in these multinational corporations who you have to go through for the storage, the supply lines, to access to markets. And so, but they have all this intellectual property rights. They have all of these ways to protect themselves from competition. And so they're able to squeeze like all of the benefits of this like massive, like the greatest wealth ever created in history. And
They being the mega corporations.
Yeah. And so you both have like, you know, first of all, they have to take on for like moving towards like big industrialized combines and other sorts of machinery that is higher tech, satellite guided, this and that, and all of this stuff. And so just to compete, it's like you have to have an enormous farm, take on a lot of debt. You have to get very advanced machinery and stuff you can't really work on. Like I said, it's like the people producing these, it's now a couple $1 million, and they're like have like it's in the contract. You buy this, you can't work on the engine or something. You have to use our like exclusive contract with our representatives to come out. And so you have all of these ways in which, again, the companies avoid all competition, but farmers are competing with everyone, and it just gets squeezed out. And then similarly, like farming, I think it's somebody said farmers in India, for instance, pay 40% of their costs of farming just intellectual property rights for the seeds, because some that like Monsanto or Cargill or these corporations that do stuff like this, they'll say, hey, these seeds we created are amazing. Try this out, but give us your seeds that you've reserved from last year. But they're like, oh, I'm sure grandma's keeping her heirloom seeds or whatever, so let's try it out. And then they're like, okay, similar, Nestle did the same thing with like formula. They're like, we'll give you free samples. And they calculate till the time that a woman stops lactating after they're not. And so they like give you free samples of this formula for so long. And then, oh, now we're charging you. And so it's drug dealer type of stuff. And so now the average farmer spends like 40% of all of their costs just paying for intellectual property rights to use the seeds, because it's like illegal for you to use the same seed, like reseed. They're like, no, you have to buy new seeds from us every year, these designer seeds. And so, and then there's different forms like like for chicken growing or something for Tyson, they'll have you, Tyson owns the chickens, but you own the farm, but Tyson tells you everything you have to buy.
Kind of like a franchise?
What's that?
Kind of like a franchise business, right? Like I own the McDonald's, but McDonald's tells me everything I have to do.
Yes, and so, but then they have this competition system between the different growers, and so if you have the fattest ones, you get the most money. If you have the scrawniest chickens with the amount of feed, then you have the least money. And so, but they'll sort of punish you if you like speak about what they're doing. Anyways, but it's just this like the farmers end up having all of the things that cost money and all the debt to build these industrial houses all up to spec, but then they have little control about the type of chickens they're getting and how high of quality, and you can lose a lot of money if you get the like lowest payout if your chickens are the least fat. Anyway, so there are like all of these schemes that these corporations have got that sort of have made it really hard for farmers. And so you've seen a lot of farms get small, and then there's just this kind of develop this cult of efficiency, like this is the only way to do it. You have to grow big or go home. Like just keep gobbling up, keep growing, but they have to take out basically the entirety of their crop they're also buying in with debt. And so if they aren't making enough money, they're screwed. So without the type of protections and subsidies we have in America, farming internationally is in awful shape right now. Like there's like numerous cases of mass suicide in farming villages in China and India and things like that. And all of it, like it just, stuff is really hard. But what this does is it creates, so many people are displaced in this process. So it creates this pressure of like massive migration from rural areas to cities, and then from poor countries to wealthier countries, as there's so much displacement happening because of the way our economy is going. So it's like the poor are like kind of low working class and poor people are getting squeezed out in this. Meanwhile, we're having massive migration being caused by the very same processes. And then it's like nationalists step in. It's their fault. It's the migrants. That's why we're having poverty. And so they aren't addressing the root issue. They're just...
Well, speaking of the root issue, I just wanted to talk to you a little bit more about, small town Kansas and how it has been, so affected, just as all of small town America and rural America in general has been by, the immense unfettered corporatization of just about every sector of the economy, of just about every community, whether it's suburban and now urban too. And the problem is that we have two parties that are equally complicit, equally bought off by these corporations: the Democrats, which pretend to be the more progressive party, and the Republicans, which are just the outright, corporate fascist party at this point. And it seems like you clearly acknowledge this reality too, and understand that. My question to you is just, has the response from voters been a likewise agreement that, the Republican Party itself is a corporate fascist party, or are you, trying to convince people on their terms that they should vote for you as a Republican? Because given your stances on issues, it seems like you'd be voting against the Republican caucus just about, or the Republicans in Senate just about, 10 out of 10 times. Like, what's your sell exactly?
Yeah, so like some of the stuff I tried to drill down, because a lot of the condescending, insufferable liberal approach is to just like, yeah, you do this, and never acknowledge what the Democrats themselves are doing.
Yeah, exactly.
Rather than like building off of shared values. So I try to identify some of the things that people care about and to say like, look, here's how we build this, and then emphasize, because there are already so many contradictions within the Republican Party. One of the ways they unite all of these very different, like what are libertarians and white nationalists and evangelicals and like so many different groups in there, what do they all have in common? It's like, we hate taxes. I would say that's like 85% of what I hear at Republican meetings is talking about how burdensome taxes are. And that can be like rich douchebags who feel like entitled to the fruits of everyone's labor in society for no good reason. Or it can be like struggling people, working class people who legitimately just feel like they're being squeezed out, and that's just a thing that they're able to point to. And then there's just kind of the idea that these people like who aren't from here, don't know us, don't like us, are making all of the decisions that affect our lives. And it's frustrating. And it's the same with like in an area where like rural voters are making decisions about what cities should be doing without understanding conditions on the ground. It's like both in the same way that rural people are dependent on representations of what like urban minority populations are like. How did the poverty get there? What's it going to take for it to get better? They're dependent on representations from media because they aren't hanging out there. They don't know those people. And that's not a good place to learn about virtually anything. But similarly, people in cities learn about rural and small town people from representations in media. Yeah. And you see similar processes of like cultural appropriation where it's like, oh, you're backwards inbred redneck hicks, like, ooh, flannel, ooh, banjos, ooh, PBR, ooh, like, and they steal all their cultural artifacts, make money off of them, but then completely demean the culture from which it came. And so I think there are lots of opportunities to like talk about similar experiences and build from shared like look at how what you're experiencing is similar to what immigrant communities are experiencing. Well, it's like their countries' economies are being shot by this globalization. Their kids have no opportunity. They move away. They don't. There's like all of these things that you can build a shared narrative rather than distancing, or like studies have shown they don't respond very well to the kind of like paternalism of liberals, like, oh, we need to help these poor people over here. Like they don't like the sort of like sympathy for the but when you talk about it from a, hey, we have the same interests, we have a lot of the same experiences. So one of the, like, normally I come out front and say it so people don't accuse me of being a deceptive whatever. I'm just like, hey, look, like I'm trying to live out the values that I got from my parents, like who are being a good neighbor and doing all this stuff, like, and we know that we should take care of each other. And I'm running as a Republican Socialist, partly because a lot of us distrust big business just as much as we distrust big government to take care of us, or to have our best interests at heart. And so that's why, and so I emphasize some of the kind of more libertarian socialist oriented policies, both like worker cooperatives and workplace democracy, cooperative finance, so it's like locally owned and more money circulating in the community rather than being siphoned off to some corporate headquarters. Talking about, because a lot of, once I started doing this more, I started getting more people come up to me at Republican meetings and going like, I don't know if we agree on everything, but you're making some sense about the economy, because, you know, they've seen Walmart come in, put everybody out of business, and then like, hey, give me a $5 million tax abatement or we're going to the next town or something.
Yeah. So if you were to get into the Senate, you would basically be trying to totally, you know, reform the Republican Party. You wouldn't be, you know, voting with these guys, that you'd be calling them out for allowing the country to get to this point. I'm trying to understand your strategy if you were to actually get into the Senate.
Yeah, so essentially, I think as a socialist, I feel like my commitment is to the working class, like organizing them around their issues and building an economy that like works for everyone, where we work for the benefit of humankind rather than for whatever produces as much growth as possible. Because like slavery produces a lot of growth in certain circumstances, because it's like, if I weren't getting paid and had someone over me being whipped, I'm sure I'd like have finished my dissertation by now. But I prefer a freer society where it's not like growth happens from deprivation. And so, wait, sorry, what was the question? My strategy.
Yeah. Like, would you vote with your colleagues, your Republican colleagues? Would you stand up to them constantly? Would you just be like at war with your own party
So I think that socialists should work both within both parties, organizing working class towards their interests, and outside of either party. I would not be, like, what I would try to do is try to introduce a lot of bills that are like not what corporate liberals want whatsoever, but so kind of some of these hybrid, like, okay, let's start supporting regenerative farming, which corporate liberals are all on board with, all of the like big ag lobbyists and things like that. Let's talk about big like financial reform. Let's talk about like supporting worker cooperatives and participatory budgeting and federally funded but locally administered job guarantees, so people at the local level have more control of saying like, okay, we have these resources, how can we support the local issues, where they're like, okay, we want to focus on infrastructure or arts or whatever it is, and so spending in the community in these ways. So, but yeah, I mean, honestly, I would probably vote in common with the squad a lot, or like they've started the Rose Caucus. I don't know if y'all have heard this. I don't know how many of those are actually might get elected, because it's, you know, most of us lefties are like no name recognition, very little money.
It's an uphill battle. Yeah, a lot of the people on the show we've talked to are of that exact ilk, and yeah, it's a similar story. You know, totally abandoned by the DCCC, even if they're in a winnable district. Totally smeared by their corporate opponents and outspent 10-1 by these corporate PACs like Emily's List and all that stuff. Has the media covered you at all in Kansas? Like, what is the have voters gotten to hear your message via the media at all, or has it just been more of a social media outreach at this point?
Yeah, there definitely have been a number of interviews at different like local newspapers and a few TV stations, and then different organizations. And the state Republican Party has kept me out at all costs, but they're also but a lot of the local chapters have had me to their forums and things, so that's been nice. I feel like I've at least got my message to a lot of people. I don't know if it's enough. That I sort of feel like in this last few weeks before the election, there's been like all these forums and events and interviews and things, and so it's sort of been my first time for a lot of people to hear about me at all. And I think I've done well at most of them, and partly just have like a much better understanding of the economy than anyone I'm running against, and then just better policy. Like some of these, we're in the middle of like this massive health crisis, on the verge of a Great Depression. Like if they decide to not renew the stimulus or something, like, and they're all talking about like, what is the biggest issue facing our nation? And Chris Kobach's talking about things like trans athletes, and give me a break. Ugh. Like, how can anyone?
It's the students on college campuses causing a ruckus.
Yeah, okay. And then the other ones are all saying, what's the biggest issue? Socialism. And I'm like,
oh yeah,
Joe Biden, the socialist.
Come on.
Yeah.
If only we had socialism in these times, we'd actually be we'd be alongside the rest of the developed world. To be frank, I mean, we'd be doing great right now if we had socialism in this country. As it is, if Bernie was president right now, they'd be saying, "Look what socialism has done to this great nation, destroyed it." As it is, it's corporate capitalism, it's Republican conservatism, neoconservatism, and the other abdication of any responsibility from the federal level. Yeah.
Brian, for people who want to learn more about your campaign, where can they go to check out your policies?
Some of them that we wrote at the beginning, I don't know how to edit websites, so I haven't updated it since like
an uphill battle.
And I lost my campaign manager because I couldn't keep paying him.
Oh no.
MatlockForSenate.com, and then follow me, Kansas Brian, on Twitter, Instagram, and Matlock for Senate on Facebook. But
cool.
Brian Matlock, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah,
we appreciate what you're doing.
Yeah, thank you so much.